Okay, so just to continue, we're up to Prime Minister number 34, Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman. Before I get on to Bannerman, just two points I'd like to make, and I'd like to thank Ethel for raising these points, my subscriber. Um, First of all, I mentioned briefly who may have been the wealthiest Prime Minister. There's debate about that, but Lord Derby would be a pretty strong candidate for that. I'd mentioned that in the Rosebery video. Actually, Derby may well have been our wealthiest Prime Minister. Secondly, an interesting question, who was the first Prime Minister to be filmed? That was most likely Salisbury. And another point, the first Prime Minister to have his voice recorded, most likely Gladstone. There is a recording that's surfacing around YouTube. I don't know how authentic it is, but it purports to be the voice of William Ute Gladstone, 1888, I believe. If that really is Gladstone, it's quite incredible. It's very, very faded, and I'm not going to put a link because it's pretty easy to find. But without further ado, I'll get on to Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman. Like Balfour, Campbell-Bannerman was a Scot, and I think this is worth pointing out because, and I apologise here for getting a little bit political, but I can't resist it. Scottish nationalists often talk about subjugation, but it is worth bearing in mind that at least seven of our prime ministers have been either Scots or of Scots descent, and they were patriots all in their own ways. So I just think that's something that needs to be pointed out. Um, so I'll get onto the biography of Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman. He's one of the prime ministers I'm personally interested in. Anyway, I'll read this out first, then get to the point. He was born in 1836 at Kelvinside House in Glasgow. This is a quote attributed to him. Personally, I am an immense believer in bed and constantly keeping horizontal. The heart and everything else goes slower and the whole system is refreshed. Some of these quotes are a bit trivial, I think. I mean, I'm sure he said more poignant things than that in his time. Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman was the first man to be officially given the title of Prime Minister. Now, this is an interesting point. In this sense, he was the de facto, or in name at least, first Prime Minister, not Walpole. So, right from Walpole right up to Balfour, none of them were officially known as Prime Minister. Although at some point in the early years, Walpole, Pelham, North, and so on, it was a term of abuse. But at some point, it began to get more respectful. So by the 20th century, it was essentially a formalized term. Um, Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman was the first man to be officially known by that title. He was an older man when he came to office. I believe he was 60, just do a quick math here, 69 when he came to office. So he was certainly getting on in years. That would make him about the third oldest Prime Minister on ascension. So Henry Campbell-Bannerman, well, I've just read that. So Henry Campbell-Bannerman was the son of the Lord Provost of Glasgow and was educated at Glasgow High School and Glasgow and Cambridge universities. In 1868 he was elected the Liberal MP for Stirling Boroughs. William Ewart Gladstone appointed him Financial Secretary to the War Office and then Secretary of State for War in his next two governments. He held the position again under Lord Rosebery. Later he became the Liberal leader and was seen as a safe pair of hands. This is ironic because he has been described as Britain's first and only radical Prime Minister. Which is interesting that I would have put down Lloyd George as a radical, but there you go. The Liberals split over the Boer War, with David Lloyd George joining Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman in condemning the campaign. He himself caused a public uproar by refusing to back his remarks about Kitchener's methods of barbarism being used to win the war. Um, so, yeah, I think that's referring to Campbell-Bannerman. I've actually got a book here which I'll show you. Great British Speeches. Not sure if that's clear or not. But Campbell-Bannerman's methods of barbarism speeches included in there, along with some more famous ones. Um, Remember, this was the height of British imperialism, Cecil Rhodes, and so on and so forth. So any politician being seen to be against foreign policy would have been seen basically akin to a traitor. Basically, Campbell-Bannerman was speaking out against the British treatment of Boers. especially women and children. And I'm someone who, whilst I love my country, I'm also very honest about that. And I have to say that Campbell-Bannerman was doing the right thing. He was brave in speaking out. He was actually responding to first-hand accounts by a young woman who had been there, seen the way the British were treating the interned firsthand. We were the first country to use concentration camps in this sense. So Campbell-Bannerman took a very outspoken view against this, and for doing so, he was slandered as a traitor, even though he made it clear that he wasn't attacking the individual British troops, which of course is something politicians need to be careful with. He was still denounced as a traitor, so he got a really rough ride for that, and I think it's a testament to his own character that he spoke up for what he believed despite it being unpopular. Lloyd George obviously saw it was the right thing as well, but certainly the Conservatives and the more right-wing Liberals absolutely laid into him for that. But in retrospect, it seems like it was the right thing to do. Following Arthur Balfour's resignation in 1905, Edward VII invited Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman as leader of the next largest party to form a government. He accepted the King's offer. His government became known for being strong and efficient, and he skillfully ensured that it embraced all wings of the Liberal Party. The Liberals went on to win the 1906 election. Following this win, he restored independence to the Transvaal and the Orange Free State, and clashed with the Lords over an education bill. It's kind of close-ended there, it doesn't say much else. I personally think that Campbell-Bannerman's an underrated Prime Minister. He made some very important reforms, and he introduced a lot of important legislation. For example, free school meals, um, and trying to find some snippets here of further. You see, the Wikipedia article is pretty comprehensive, so I'm trying to find some legislation that's on hand, so to speak. Free school meals is an important one. The Trade Disputes Act of 1906, the Workmen's Compensation Act of 1906, the Probation of Offenders Act 1907. These were all very far-reaching reforms. Um, well, actually, it says under his successful successor Asquith, even more far-reaching reforms were implemented. But I think we have to, sometimes I think Campbell-Bannerman is overshadowed by Asquith and Lloyd George, who are both more famous prime ministers. But perhaps that's unfair. Um, for an elder statesman, I think he achieved quite a lot in his time, and I think that he's sometimes unfairly overlooked. Um, so a person that I would rank Campbell-Bannerman much higher. Um, he's up there with people like Russell for being perhaps understated. In terms of being remembered, actually, he was the last prime minister to have died in office in the year 1908, and he was, just bear with me a second, he was 71. He died at 10 Downing Street, the last prime minister to do so. So yeah, I think Campbell-Bannerman was an interesting man. There is statues to him in Glasgow and I believe in London. And like all famous figures of the day, he was caricatured and so on. Um, in an uncharacteristically emotional speech on the 27th of April, the day of Campbell-Bannerman's funeral, his successor H. Asquith told the House of Commons, well, I'm not going to read out the whole speech, but he gave a rousing appraisal of Campbell-Bannerman. So that's very interesting. And I'll leave it there. But there you have it. He was the first prime minister to be termed prime minister, and certainly a very interesting figure, and in my opinion, deserves a lot more credit.